There is a moment some people go through, not everyone, but those who pay close attention to their lives when they realize the problem isn't outside them. It is a strange and disorienting moment, not always a comfortable one. For a long time before it arrives, the assumption is that what needs to change is external. The circumstances must improve. The right opportunity should present itself. The right relationship needs to come along. The right environment, proper recognition, and the right opening in the world must appear. And when it does, when things finally align as they are supposed to, life will be what it was always meant to be. And then comes the moment when you realize the circumstances have shifted, that the opportunity has arrived, that the relationship exists, that the environment has changed. And something within you hasn't moved. The dissatisfaction remains. The restlessness persists. The feeling of being slightly outside your own life, of watching it happen rather than fully experiencing it, has followed you through every external change because it never resided in the external in the first place. It lives here, within the interior, in the stories about yourself that you've been carrying without ever examining them, in the beliefs about what you deserve, what is possible for you, and who you fundamentally are, beliefs installed before you could consent to them and that have been running ever since. It resides in the relationship between you and your own life, a relationship that has never been fully explored, fully chosen, or truly yours. When you truly see this not just as an interesting idea but as a living truth about your experience, something shifts, not easily, not all at once, but irreversibly. Because once you find the source of the limitation in the right place, you also find the source of liberation there. And the right place is here, inside, accessible, yours. External reinvention is like rearranging furniture in a house whose foundation remains unchanged. The furniture looks different, the rooms feel different, yet when the same person walks through them, carrying the same interior, the old patterns quickly reemerge. Internal reinvention, by contrast, involves rebuilding the foundation itself, the most patient, demanding, and crucial effort a person can undertake. It is the only transformation that truly endures. Today, we are going to do this work together, not just as an idea or inspiration to carry with you until it fades, but as a genuine, specific, and practically grounded exploration of what it means to transform a life from the inside out, and exactly how that transformation is built, sustained, and completed. This is one of the most important conversations I know how to have. Let's have it fully. Why external change fails and internal change lasts. We need to start here because most people seeking genuine transformation in their lives begin in the wrong place. Understanding why that starting point is wrong specifically and clearly, without judgment, is what distinguishes lasting change from change that ultimately reverts to the original state. The pattern of external reinvention. Most attempts at significant life change follow a recognizable pattern. Something in the current life becomes unbearable. The job, the relationship, the environment, the weight, the habit, or the situation. The person decides to make a change. They summon genuine motivation, put in real effort, and achieve an actual change in the external circumstances. The job changes. The relationship ends or starts anew. The environment shifts. The habit is broken. For a period, sometimes a day, sometimes a month, sometimes a year, things feel truly different. The new circumstances bring fresh stimulation, energy, and hope. The change feels genuine. The relief is real. The hope that this time, finally, things will be different is genuine. And then, with a regularity so consistent, it might as well be gravity, the patterns return. Not always in the same form, the specific circumstances are different, after all. But in their essential nature, the new job develops the same dynamics that made the old one unbearable. The new relationship causes the same fundamental difficulties, though in a different guise. The new environment triggers the same responses as the old one. The interrupted habit is replaced by a new one that serves the same underlying function. This is not a character flaw. It is not a lack of willpower. It is the expected outcome of treating symptoms while ignoring the root cause. The root was never the external circumstances. It was the inside, the beliefs, patterns, emotional defaults, and unexamined stories that created those circumstances and will continue producing similar ones until they are addressed at their core. Why is the interior much harder to change than the exterior is? If the problem is internal and the solution is internal, why do so many people spend so much of their lives pursuing external solutions? Why is the inside so much harder to change than the outside? The first reason is visibility. External circumstances are concrete and changeable. You can see them, point to them, and describe them to others. The job, the relationship, the city, these are real, visible, and clearly modifiable. The interior, however, is harder to see. Beliefs are so woven into everyday thinking that they no longer feel like beliefs, they seem like reality. Emotional patterns are so familiar that they no longer register as patterns. They feel like reasonable responses to circumstances. The interior acts as the lens through which everything else is viewed. And a lens by nature is very difficult to see. The second reason is discomfort. External change, even if difficult, happens in the world. Internal change happens to the self, to the identity, to the story of who you are, which has been the organizing principle of your experience for as long as you can remember. That story, no matter how limiting, offers a form of coherence, a stable sense of self that, paradoxically, feels more secure than not knowing who you will be after genuine transformation. The third reason is that true internal change happens slowly. It doesn't produce the immediate, visible, social media-worthy proof of transformation that external change often shows. It is quiet, gradual, and often invisible to others, and, for long periods, even to yourself. In a culture addicted to quick, dramatic, visible change, the patience needed for internal reinvention is genuinely countercultural. It requires you to trust a process with delayed, hard-to-see results. And that trust, without external validation, is itself a significant challenge. Every external change not backed by internal change is temporary. Every internal change that genuinely occurs is permanent. The person who changes at the level of belief, identity, or emotional pattern, that person doesn't need willpower to sustain the change because it has become part of who they are. They aren't fighting against themselves to maintain a new behavior. They are simply being themselves. That's the difference between transformation that exhausts and transformation that frees. One is an effort against the current. The other is the current flowing in the right direction. The true extent of internal reinvention. When I say transforming your life from the inside out, I want to be precise about which level of the interior we are focusing on, because there are multiple layers of interiority, each requiring different kinds of work. The surface layer is behavior. It includes what you do, your habits, and how you spend your time, energy, and attention. This layer can be changed through conscious effort and habit formation, and most self-improvement work happens here. It is real and valuable work, but it's the most superficial layer. Changes at this level usually don't last unless you also change the deeper layers. The middle layer involves emotion and patterns. The emotional defaults, the typical ways you respond to difficulty, intimacy, success, failure, and uncertainty. The relational patterns, the common dynamics you tend to recreate in relationships, regardless of who the specific people are. The coping strategies you rely on during stress. This layer is deeper and harder to access than the behavioral layer. Changes here require more honesty, patience, and usually more support, but when accomplished, they are more lasting. The deepest layer is identity and belief. It is the core story of who you are. The beliefs about yourself, others, what you deserve, and what is possible form the foundation of your experience of reality. This is the layer that internal reinvention primarily targets because everything else stems from it. When you change this layer, behavior naturally shifts as an expression of that change. Emotional patterns also change because the underlying beliefs that create them have shifted. When you change this layer, your life transforms not through sudden intervention, but through a gradual, organic, and undeniable reorientation of everything that flows from your identity. The architecture of a true interior transformation. Internal reinvention isn't a single act. It's a series of connected processes, each setting the stage for the next, together forming the true transformation of a life from its core. Understanding the structure, what the process really involves, and the typical order of stages helps you navigate it intentionally rather than reacting unthinkingly. Stage 1. The honest inventory. Every genuine internal reinvention starts with an honest assessment of what truly exists within. Not the idealized version, not who you wish you were, not who you are on your best days, not who you present yourself as in social situations where impression management takes over the real interior, as it actually functions within the daily experience of your life. This inventory is the most challenging part of the entire process because it demands something most people find genuinely difficult: the simultaneous presence of honesty and self-compassion. Honesty without self-compassion leads to shame, which in turn causes defensiveness that can prevent the inventory from reaching its most important insights. Conversely, self-compassion without honesty can foster comfortable self-deception, preventing true understanding. Both qualities are necessary. Conducting an honest inventory requires the same clear-eyed, caring approach a good doctor uses when making a proper diagnosis, not minimizing what is true, not catastrophizing, but simply seeing it accurately so that what follows can be genuinely responsive to reality. The inventory asks, what beliefs about myself have I never examined? What patterns in relationships work, and my responses to both difficulty and success recur regardless of external circumstances? What emotional defaults operate beneath my conscious awareness? Which aspects of my current life have I been accepting because honestly examining them felt too threatening? These questions may be uncomfortable, but they are the starting point for everything. An honest inventory serves as a map of the territory you're working in. Without it, the transformation process is like shooting in the dark. With it, you know exactly what needs attention, and the process can be truly intentional. Stage 2. The source work. Once the honest inventory reveals the patterns and beliefs that limit life, the next step is to understand their origins. This isn't about blaming. It's not about faulting the people or environments that created the patterns. Instead, it's about understanding the logic behind how they were formed, so the adult mind can evaluate them with the perspective that wasn't available when they were formed. Most of the beliefs and patterns that limit adult life were formed in childhood and early adolescence, in response to real experiences in real environments. They were not mistakes or irrationalities. They were intelligent adaptations, the most functional responses available to a developing person with limited resources, navigating circumstances they did not choose. The child who learned that showing vulnerability could lead to criticism or dismissal and therefore stopped doing so was not wrong to make that choice. In that environment, it was a protective response. The person who realized that love was conditional on their performance and thus became a high achiever, never feeling quite satisfied with their accomplishments, was not broken. They were acting logically given the conditions they faced. The source work does not question the intelligence of those original adaptations. It simply asks, do these adaptations still fit the environment you're in now? The belief that vulnerability is dangerous, does that still hold in your current life? Or is it an outdated system operating under new conditions where being vulnerable could be a strength? The belief that you're only valuable when performing at a certain level, does that reflect your current relationships? Or is it a childhood agreement that has expired but was never formally canceled? When the source of a belief is clearly seen, when its origin is understood, and its original logic is acknowledged, it loses much of its automatic authority. It becomes possible to regard it as what it truly is, a conclusion drawn from specific experiences, not a constant truth about reality, and a conclusion that can be reevaluated, can be changed. Stage 3. Grieving what was and releasing the old identity. This stage is often the most overlooked in accounts of personal transformation, and omitting it is a major reason transformation efforts stall or regress. Genuine internal reinvention requires letting go of a version of yourself, not just a behavior or a habit, but a version of yourself. The identity built around limiting beliefs, the self-concept that shaped your experiences and choices for years or even decades. Even when that identity was limiting, it was familiar and coherent. It was, in its way, yours. And losing it, even in pursuit of something genuinely better, involves a real loss that demands genuine grieving. This grief is often left unnamed. The cultural story of transformation is almost always positive. The caterpillar becomes the butterfly. The phoenix rises from the ashes. The hero finishes the journey and returns changed. What these stories overlook is the real mourning period for the self left behind. The confusion and disorientation of existing between identities, no longer fully who you were, not yet entirely who you are becoming. The strange sadness of releasing even a limiting story, because that story was the one in which your history made sense. Avoiding this grief leads to a transformation built on an incomplete foundation. The old identity wasn't fully let go of, it was just hidden. Hidden things tend to reemerge. The grief that is overlooked often returns as resistance, regression, or an unexplainable pull back toward old patterns, especially when new ones are being firmly established. Grieve the old self with sincere care, not with despair. Grief is not a sign that the transformation is wrong. It is a sign that the transformation is genuine. What truly matters is that the life left behind was truly lived, truly yours, and truly worth honoring before it is transcended. You cannot fully become who you are becoming until you have fully honored who you were. The old self deserves a farewell, not a dismissal, condemnation, or a vow never to return. A genuine, compassionate, and thankful farewell. It carried you as far as it could. It was the best version of you for the life you were living. Now, a larger version is needed. That larger version can only fully emerge when the smaller one is released with the dignity it deserves. Stage 4. The intentional creation of the new interior. Once the honest inventory is complete, the foundational work is done, and the grief associated with the old identity has been sincerely processed, the rebuilding process can begin. Not impatiently, not dramatically, but with the deliberate, patient, and specific intention of someone who understands what they are creating and why. The new interior is not built solely through affirmations, though intentional thought truly has power. A single transformative experience does not create it, though impactful experiences can spark change. Instead, it is formed through the consistent daily practice of choosing in thought, decision, behavior, and relationships the version of yourself you are becoming, rather than the one you have been. Every decision made from the new identity rather than the old one strengthens the new neural pathways, self-concept, and emotional patterns. Each time you respond to challenges with the patience you're cultivating rather than reacting impulsively, the new pattern deepens. Each time you act in accordance with your chosen values rather than your fears, the new identity feels more real, more present, and more genuinely yours. This process is slow. It often goes unnoticed. There will be days when the old habits are loud and the new ones barely heard, and change feels like wishful thinking rather than true progress. Those days are part of the process. The setbacks that seem like failure are almost always just the old patterns surfacing for a final review before they let go. Trust the process. Keep doing the work. When you stumble, return to the path you've chosen without drama or excessive self-blame. Progress is happening, even when it's unseen. It always is. 7 practices for genuine internal reinvention. The architecture explains what the process is. The practices guide what to do tomorrow morning. Both are essential. Here are 7 specific, daily applicable, genuinely transformative practices that gradually build the new interior. Practice 1. The morning interior check-in. The most crucial moment for internal reinvention each day is the first few minutes after waking, before the external world fully claims your attention. During those minutes, your inner self is more accessible than at almost any other time, less defended, less distracted, and less shaped by the demands of the outside world. The morning interior check-in is a 5-minute act of honest self-reflection, not with a list of goals or affirmations, though those have their place, but with 3 simple questions, asked with real openness and patience for the answers. The first question is, who am I choosing to be today? It's not about what I plan to do, but about who I choose to be, the quality of my presence, the character I bring, the identity I consciously inhabit rather than defaulting reactively. The second question is, what old pattern is most likely to be triggered today, and how will I respond to it differently? This question helps bring awareness to the day's specific challenges, the situations, relationships, or circumstances most likely to activate the patterns you're working to change. Recognizing the trigger early, in the calm of the morning, is very different from encountering it unprepared in the heat of the moment. The third question is, what is a genuine expression of the person I am becoming that I can bring into today? Not a grand gesture, not a dramatic demonstration. Just a small, specific, authentic expression of the new inner self woven into the ordinary fabric of the day. 5 minutes, 3 questions, every morning. Over months, the cumulative effect of this practice is the gradual replacement of reactive drift moving through the day on automatic pilot, defaulting to old patterns with conscious inhabitation, moving through the day as the person you are deliberately becoming. Practice 2. The Belief Revision Protocol. This practice targets the deepest layer of the inner self, the core beliefs that shape the patterns and behaviors above them. It is precise and demanding, and one of the most effective tools for real identity transformation. The belief revision process begins by identifying a specific limiting belief, something you've genuinely acknowledged in your honest inventory, and traced to its source in the source work. It should be concrete. I am not the kind of person who succeeds at meaningful things. People in my life eventually leave. I am not worthy of being fully seen and loved. Once the belief is clearly identified, the protocol proceeds through 4 steps. The first step is to examine the evidence. What is the actual evidence supporting this belief? Not the felt sense of its truth, the specific dated instances the belief would cite in its defense. Writing them down removes the inflated certainty with which they are often held, and reveals them as a limited set of experiences that have been overgeneralized. The second step is to search for counter-evidence. What evidence challenges this belief? The examples that contradict it, the times the feared event didn't occur, the relationships that didn't follow the expected pattern, the accomplishments the belief claimed were impossible. This counter-evidence isn't fabricated, it's genuinely present in nearly everyone's experiences. The negativity bias hasn't surfaced as clearly as the confirming evidence. The third step is the revised belief construction. Considering the entire picture, both supporting and opposing evidence, what is the most accurate, generous, and genuinely honest belief that the full evidence supports? Not an affirmation made to feel good, an accurate update reflecting what is actually demonstrably true. The fourth step is the embodiment practice. Repeat the revised belief daily during the morning check-in and whenever it is activated until the neural pathways supporting it reach the same depth and automaticity as the old belief. This is not a quick process that lasts a week. It requires months of consistent effort from the patient. However, the end goal, a truly accurate, personal, and generative belief system, transforms everything it influences. Practice 3. The pattern interrupt. Knowing that a pattern exists and being able to interrupt it in real time are two distinct skills. The practice of interrupting patterns bridges that gap. Every habitual pattern, whether behavioral, emotional, or relational, has a trigger, a sequence, and an outcome. The trigger is the stimulus that activates the pattern. The sequence is the automatic behavioral or emotional response. The outcome is the result the pattern produces, which often reinforces the belief that caused it. A pattern interrupt involves intentionally inserting a pause, a choice, or a different action at the moment of activation, the point between the trigger and the automatic response where change can occur. Building pattern interrupts begins with identifying the specific triggers of the patterns you're trying to change. Which situations, interactions, or internal states reliably activate the old pattern? Knowing these triggers precisely allows you to recognize them in real time as they occur, rather than only noticing the pattern in hindsight after it has already played out. Then, for each identified trigger, create a specific interrupt, a clear, predetermined action or response you will execute at the moment of activation rather than an automatic reaction. Not a vague intention to improve. A specific, practiced response. When I notice this particular kind of criticism and feel the familiar urge to become defensive, I will take one breath, identify the emotion internally, and ask a clarifying question before responding. The interrupt should be practiced in low-stakes situations before relying on it in high-stakes ones. Use it intentionally in small cases to build the neural pathway for the new response. When the critical activation occurs, when the old pattern fires strongly, the interrupt pathway is already well established enough to provide a true alternative. Practice 4. Making the expanding comfort zone a daily habit. Internal reinvention requires gradually expanding your sense of what you're capable of. This expansion can't happen only in your mind, it must be rooted in experience. It involves genuine, embodied encounters with the limits of your current self-concept, providing real evidence for a more expansive identity. Expanding your comfort zone is not about making a sudden leap into completely unknown territory. That kind of exposure, without proper preparation, is more likely to reinforce limits than to push past them. Instead, it involves daily efforts to do one thing that pushes your boundaries, to sit at the edge of your current self-concept. One thing the old identity would have avoided or rejected, the emerging identity chooses to approach. Small actions matter greatly. The introverted person who starts a sincere conversation with a stranger is doing identity edge work. The person who has never thought of themselves as creative and who makes one drawing to see what happens is doing identity edge work. The person who has always backed down in conflict and who, just once, stands firm with calm and care is doing identity edge work. Each act is small. Each is a vote for the larger self. Over months and years, these votes accumulate to form the most natural and lasting kind of identity growth. The key principle is maintaining daily consistency rather than pursuing dramatic intensity. A small step each day leads to more authentic identity change than a large leap every few months followed by setbacks. Daily practice keeps growth grounded in reality and sustainability rather than in aspiration and temporary gains. Practice 5. The relationship audit and realignment. Internal reinvention does not happen in isolation. The people we spend the most time with, the quality of their presence, the implicit expectations they hold of us, and the relational dynamics we've built either support or limit the internal transformation we're striving for. This isn't a reason to drastically change all your relationships. Most genuine relationships have the flexibility and depth to support your growth, and many will evolve alongside you if changes are communicated honestly and carefully. However, it's an opportunity to evaluate your relational environment and ask honestly, does the way I present myself in these relationships reflect who I am becoming or who I have been? Are there relationships where the existing dynamic depends on me staying the same and where I need to renegotiate that dynamic as I change? The relationship audit also involves identifying those who embody the interior you are creating. The people who reflect the qualities you are cultivating, not perfectly and not without their own flaws, but genuinely and recognizably. Being close to those who already live in the interior you are building provides one of the strongest environmental supports for internal transformation. Their existence confirms it. Their presence models it. Their relationship with you serves as a living practice space for the new self you are developing. Seek those people intentionally. Not to imitate them, your reinvention is yours, shaped by your history and nature, but to be close enough to see that the inner you are creating is livable, that real people are part of it, that you aren't building a fantasy, you are connecting with a lineage. Practice 6. The Transformation Journal. The Transformation Journal is a record of reinvention, honest, consistent, dated documentation of the inner work and its results. It's not a diary of daily events. Instead, it tracks transformation, beliefs that have been examined and changed, patterns that have been broken, moments when the new self appears and when the old self reappears, and the evidence of change accumulating over time. The Transformation Journal serves three functions at once. The first is processing. Honestly writing about internal experiences creates clarity, integration, and a sense of completion that thinking about them alone rarely achieves. The journal is the space where this work happens, where grief is expressed and processed, and where an honest inventory is taken and regularly refreshed. The second function is evidence accumulation. Over months and years, the journal becomes a clear record of how much change has actually occurred. This record is invaluable on tough days, days when old patterns are loud, the transformation feels like an illusion, and the evidence of real change is hard to perceive. The journal holds that evidence objectively. It documents the person you were 6 months ago with a level of detail that memory, which tends to smooth over progress, cannot preserve. Reading those earlier entries from the present, from the slightly different, slightly more expanded, slightly more truly inhabited self, is one of the most powerful experiences in the transformation process. The third function is intention. The journal is where you regularly and specifically articulate who you are becoming. It gives language, substance, and direction to your emerging identity. This is where transformation is not just experienced, but also authored, consciously shaped by the person it's happening to, rather than occurring passively without guidance. Write it down, all of it, the clear seeing and the confused fumbling, the days of genuine progress and the days of baffling regression, the grief of what is being released and the genuine wonder of what is emerging. Write it all down with the care of someone who understands that this passage through this particular inner landscape will never happen again. It is your story, at its most fundamental level, the most important story you will ever tell. Share it with yourself honestly and completely as it unfolds. That act of sharing is itself the transformation. Practice 7. The long patience. This final practice is not merely a technique, it is an attitude, a way of relating to time and the process of transformation, the most vital of all the practices and the one most often left out. Internal reinvention does not happen on the timeline the motivated mind wishes it would. The belief instilled over 20 years ago does not change in a month of journaling. The emotional pattern that has run for a decade does not dissolve after a week of interruptions. The identity formed in response to a childhood environment does not transform after a single insightful conversation. Transformation unfolds over the years. Not continuously or evenly, there are periods of rapid, visible change and periods that feel completely still. There are seasons of real progress and seasons that seem like setbacks but are actually deeper work needed for more dramatic changes. The timeline isn't straight or predictable, and none of that is wrong. That's how true inner transformation really happens. Long patience is the practice of trusting this timeline, of working the practices with genuine commitment, regardless of whether the results are visible yet, of meeting difficult days without interpreting them as evidence that the transformation has failed, and of meeting days of clear progress without interpreting them as evidence that the work is complete. Long-term patience also means practicing self-compassion as a steady practice rather than an occasional effort. You will slip back into old habits. You will have days of genuine regression. At some point, you may doubt whether you can achieve this level of change. These are not signs of failure. They are part of the process. Long-term patience accepts them as such, with honesty and without drama, with acknowledgement and without catastrophizing, with full awareness that the work continues even on difficult days, perhaps especially on those days. The person on the other side. I want to take you somewhere now, to the other side of the process, not to rush you through it or to skip the necessary work, but to give you a full picture of what the transformation is building toward. The destination, held clearly, is itself a resource for the journey. They carry a different weight. A person who has truly reinvented themselves internally carries a different weight than someone who has only changed their external circumstances. Not necessarily a lighter weight. A fully lived life is not without weight. However, this weight is real and earned, not accumulated. It reflects genuine engagement with a true life, rather than the extra burden of unexamined beliefs and unprocessed patterns that have accumulated over every ordinary difficulty for years. Once the unexamined material has been analyzed, old patterns disrupted and replaced, limiting beliefs revised, and a new identity genuinely adopted, what remains is authentic life. The true difficulties, joys, relationships, and work emerge without the amplification the unprocessed inner world always added. That difference between the real weight of real life and the accumulated weight of an unexamined inner world is very hard to appreciate from the outside and very hard to forget from the inside. It is one of the most tangible and immediate gifts of true internal reinvention. They have a different relationship with themselves. Perhaps the most profound change that internal reinvention brings is a shift in the primary relationship, the one between a person and themselves. Between the person who experiences and the interior from which that experience arises. Before the reinvention, that relationship is often marked by unfamiliarity, criticism, and avoidance. The interior remains unclear because genuine self-examination is ignored. The self-relationship feels cold because the self is mainly seen as the source of inadequacy, limitation, and things that need fixing. The interior is a problem to be managed rather than a home to be enjoyed. After the reinvention, after the honest inventory, the source work, the grief, and the patient construction of a new interior, the relationship shifts. The person begins to know themselves. Not completely. Self-knowledge is always partial and constantly growing, but with the depth, specificity, and honesty that genuine engagement over time brings, they understand their patterns and gifts. They recognize their vulnerabilities and strengths. They are familiar enough with the terrain of their interior to navigate it with confidence rather than stumble through it in the dark. From that understanding, a different quality of self-relationship becomes possible. Not the self-congratulation of someone who has avoided honest self-examination, but genuine, earned self-respect from having fully explored their interior, faced what was there without flinching, done the work of changing what needed changing, and arrived at a self they can inhabit with genuine ease. The person on the other side of genuine internal reinvention is not a different person. They are a more fully themselves person. The transformation did not replace who they were with someone else. It removed what was covering who they always were, the beliefs installed by others, the patterns adapted to environments that no longer exist, the story written before they had authorship. What remains, when that is cleared, is not a stranger. It is the most essentially, most genuinely, most irreducibly you thing in existence. The you that was always there. The you that the whole journey was always toward. That is who is waiting on the other side. We have traveled the full arc today. From the moment of recognition, realizing the problem was never outside through honest inventory, the source work, necessary grief, and the patient construction of a new interior, into practices that transform daily, embodied, and real, and then forward to the person on the other side. I want to conclude by highlighting something about the work we discussed today that is easy to overlook amid the details of the stages and practices. Internal reinvention is a bold expression of self-respect. It is the decision that you are worth the effort and that the interior of your life deserves the same quality of attention, the same genuine care, and the same honest engagement that you give to everything and everyone else you take seriously. It is the decision that the story running inside you, the one shaping your every experience, generating your every pattern, and constructing the very reality you inhabit, deserves to be examined, understood, and, where necessary, rewritten. Most people never do this work. Not because they are lazy, indifferent, or incapable, but because no one told them it was possible. Because the culture of external achievement offers so many appealing options that the more difficult, quieter, and truly necessary work becomes easy to postpone. Because examining the inner self requires a kind of courage, the courage to see yourself honestly, grieve sincerely, and change at the level where change truly matters, that not everyone is prepared for at every stage of life. You are here. You've been following this conversation closely, showing you're ready, not for the perfect version of the transformation. That version doesn't exist and was never the point. For the real version, the one that's messy, slow, sometimes baffling, and ultimately the most important thing you will ever do. The inside of your life isn't fixed. It was built under conditions you didn't choose, before you had the power to choose otherwise. Now, with full power, understanding how it works, and the practices to intentionally shape it, it can be rebuilt. Not in a day, not without struggle, but truly, completely, and permanently. The lasting transformation begins here. In this moment of self-awareness, when something inside you recognizes that this is true, that this is the work, and that this is the path, that recognition marks the start. It's not the end of a journey or the arrival at a destination, but the first step of the most significant walk of your life. The walk that takes you inward, through everything you've been holding on to, through beliefs that were never truly yours, through the grief of letting go of what's behind, and out on the other side, into the life that has been waiting for the real you to arrive and inhabit it fully. That life isn't a fantasy. It's not for someone else. It's built by doing this work, day by day, right from where you stand now. Start today, not with a dramatic gesture, with an honest inventory. One question, ask with sincere openness and genuine concern for the answer. Who am I really? Sit with that question. Let it be open. Everything you're becoming depends on your willingness to be honest. Now you're ready.